we're really looking at the nuance over the nonsense. And I think for influencer marketing, there's so much nuance, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. We're too often looking for that one silver bullet. And we hope that we can unpack these different areas for everybody so you feel more confident when you're making decisions as you go through influencer marketing practices.
All right, fantastic. All right, well, we'll have a little game here. Call us out if we say any of these words. We've got virality, synergy, talents, interesting, agile, yes.
That's me.
Yes, wow effect, another good one. So yeah, we will just pivot. I love it. Okay, these are awesome. We'll have to build a little list of these afterwards. So yeah, so here we are. We're here talking about influencer marketing measurement, and we intend to do this in a very no nonsense way. And so let's see, some of the objectives that we really want to cover today include covering influencer marketing from measurement from different angles. So there's the campaign angle, there's the program level, there's how do you talk about it in the context of executive reporting, and there's all of these, these different levels that you need to think about. They're all important, and they all, deserve to the right attention. And specifically, we want to cover a couple key areas. And some of these are things that people were asking about when we had the question on the registration form, what do you want to hear about? Definitely saw a lot of people talking about how to set the right objectives, how to make sure your objectives align to what, your metrics align to the objectives that you're setting. We're going to talk a little bit about 3 categories of influencer marketing metrics and how each one of those can help you make decisions, can help you improve. And lastly, we're going to, really talk about throughout the whole presentation is really about how can measurement drive continuous improvement, because that's really why we're measuring. It's to get better, it's to show improvement, it's to realize improvement. Lauren, were there anything, in some of the question or in some of the responses that we got from folks as they were registering, was there any sort of theme that you saw?
Yeah, I think what I noticed the most was looking for best practices. And I hope what we take you through today really kind of feeds that for the people that it kind of mentioned it in their answers. Because when we're going to be stripping this back, how we're going to is really looking at the fundamentals, and really everything we're going through today should be seen as best practices in marketing, and how do you adapt that to influencers. And then the other ones was like benchmarks and KPIs, and I definitely have a lot of good learnings from our journey at Revlon to share, and how different brands on this call today could even go back to their desks afterwards and think about how could they start to interrogate and discover their own kind of KPIs and benchmarks to show progress. So I think those are the 2 main themes I took, and hopefully we'll be able to touch on them as we go in each section.
Sounds good. Yeah, so it's a pretty basic agenda here. We wanted to start by talking about some of the common traps, some of the mistakes that we might accidentally fall into, or just maybe some of the old practices that have stuck around for a long time that maybe need some rethinking. So we're going to cover that briefly. And then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time talking about effective influencer marketing and what does it look like at those different levels. There will be dedicated Q&A time, but we have the chat open. And if you have questions, please chat them in at any time. And we'll do our best to be as interactive as possible. But worst case, we'll have plenty of time at the end as well. And a recording will be shared afterwards. So if you don't mind, one more quick interaction here. We would just love to know a little bit about what you're thinking in terms of the most frustrating or challenging part about influencer marketing measurement. We have a couple of different options here. Of course, if you don't see something that isn't listed, the chat's open as well. And as we'll leave this open for just a minute. While Lauren, maybe I just throw the question over to you and we can get started. What for you is the most frustrating thing about measuring the practice of influencer marketing? And maybe tell us a little bit about like where you were a year ago or so.
I was going to say, I can't believe it's a year since we last actually were on stage at WWD talking about the same topic and how we progressed. And I think being another year along, we've progressed further at Revlon. And so when I think about measurement and, the journey that I've been on to reestablish our global ways of working, and that covers, how do we discover influencers? How do we contract them? How do we measure them? How do we track them? And how do we report back on them to our senior management? All of these things listed here for me are some of the frustrations that come with, measurement and not having the right things set up. But the one that, kind of comes back to our journey specifically at Revlon, and the one of the most frustrating pieces that I think really is fundamentally underpins all of these, and was the first thing that I discovered on my journey to knowing that we really needed to revamp what we were doing, was the fact that our teams were siloed. And I feel like a lot of, there's a few beauty brands or skincare brands on this call today. When you have a holding company and you have multiple teams underneath them, you not only have a marketing team, you've got the IMC team, then you have the influencer team, and they are all functioning that little bit different across all the different brands. And so that was the first thing that really kind of shone. It might seem obvious that working in silos is something that we easily lapse into, but this silos ways of working really impacted the way in which we were able to work together, the way in which we were able to report back on information, show progress to management. We had no unified system. And so with that being the first thing we exposed, it really allowed us to go, okay, wait a minute, we need to hold up and understand what are all the different things we're doing at the different brands and practices. How are we doing it? Why are we doing it the way we're doing it? And how can we improve this so ultimately we're able to have, the best campaigns in place, measurement that people understand and have common language across the whole universe within Revlon, and then most importantly able to report back on it and show our progress over time. So I think silos are the ones that underpins all of these four things that are here in the poll, that really kind of frustrates the whole measurement system. If you're not ready there at the start, set up correctly, then it's going to hinder you all the way through. So hopefully that answers that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting to see where the audience is, and the top, the most common choice was measuring against the wrong objectives. We're going to get into that in just a second. Closely followed by the other three, and a few folks not seeing their biggest frustration listed. So if you are interested in dropping that to us, we can certainly cover that. And I think, I think these are definitely some of the biggest issues and that folks are facing. I think another one that we didn't list is that there are so many things you can measure today. I mean, technology is pretty great in many ways, and we have a lot of data available, but is it the right data, and are we using it in the right way? And is it, when is it most applicable to what we're doing? So I think that that's really, really interesting. And when we were talking about this, I think ultimately the challenge with poor measurement is that it's costly. It's costly because of so many different reasons, whether that is productivity, investment going down the drain, time wasted. There's if you're not measuring correctly, then it's costing you.
Or if you're trying to measure everything, then, you're trying to test and learn everything. You're not really learning anything either. So that in itself can contribute to that costly mistake.
Okay, well, I think we spent enough time talking about like what doesn't work. Why don't we jump into actually what is effective influencer marketing measurement? And honestly, Lauren is here because she has the most amazing experience. I'm just going to say a couple of different words to sort of set the stage here. But at Tracker, we really see that there are different categories of influencer marketing metrics that can be applicable at any and all level, and it really depends on what you're trying to do. That will kind of narrow you in on which metric you should be using at any given time. I think that relying on one metric as your end all be all is not ever a good idea in any form of marketing, really. And so these are the three buckets that we see. We see campaign impact metrics, we see spend efficiency metrics, and cost equivalency. Campaign metrics are used, as you can imagine, to measure and analyze and understand the impact of your campaigns. And within that, there's different metrics that will be aligned to whatever it is you're doing. And Lauren's going to walk us through that in just a second. Spend efficiency metrics are really your cost per metric, your cost per post, cost per engagement, et cetera, which really help you understand how efficient your investment is, and really are important levers for driving your return on investment. And we'll talk more about that, of course. And then you've got the cost equivalency metrics when you're trying to compare the practice of influencer marketing to other potential channels that you have that, at your disposal, and how do you decide which type of program is better, or which is one outperforming the other. And so we're going to jump into all of them. We're going to take them one by one. So Lauren, can you just talk a little bit about how you approach campaign performance measurement?
Definitely. And what you'll learn about me through this is I'm very much a marketing nerd and a fundamentals nerd. And all of these things really, allow you to kind of create the best campaigns for the short and the long term. But before I kind of dive into this part, going back to what Evie said about effective influencer marketing, I think it's really important to define, what effectiveness is as well. And I think most commonly it's proof that a campaign has actually met its objectives. And so when you hear in the industry, like this campaign was effective, it really means that this campaign was able to deliver upon the set out goals by the brands. And so when we're thinking about measurement, the the most important thing is understanding, what are your objectives? What are you trying to measure? And, this slide, for me, when we think of the industry that we're in, we a little bit have our kind of mouths on the crack pipe of short-termism, and it's easy to fall into, what we can measure now versus what we can measure later. And within marketing overall, this short-term, long-term synergy is really important to nail. And so at Revlon, when we were thinking about and resetting our goals and our objectives for influencers, what we first noticed that, one, we were working in a silo, but the objectives that everybody was being asked to report out on were sales. Every single thing. It didn't matter which brand it was, even if they had, an awareness, consideration, and relevancy issue. We were asked to equivalize everything to a sale without acknowledging the different marketing tensions that we were solving for, and then put a dollar number on it with EMV, which is a volatile metric in my opinion. You can't actually control that up or down versus your own brand objectives. And so seeing this from a macro and sharing this with leadership, we had this aha moment that we really need to go back to the fundamentals of what is effective marketing and apply that to influencer marketing. And so with that, we looked at the short-term activities and what you can do in paid media and marketing, and the long-term, and we created this spectrum of objectives, which you're going to maybe laugh because it's going to seem so basic, but sometimes we're like a kite. You need to pull us back down as marketers, because at the end of the day, when we're setting up effective campaigns, we really need to think about, what objectives are we actually trying to solve for the brand and for the business. And so, we are in obviously the game of sales, and everyone will tell you that. I work in CPG as well. But what we need to understand to get to that number, how is the brand and the marketing actually working together? And then what do we need to overcome? Are there any challenges? Which really lays you out into this brand health. Like, do you need to drive awareness, consideration, purchase intent? And then of course there is sales, because there is definitely dynamics where certain brands are in better health than others, that this could be a primary objective, or there's something specific that you're doing that really ties back to that lever in a seasonal moment. And then lastly, there is creative. And I think we forget sometimes that these influencers are content creators, and they serve a purpose in helping us fill some gaps in our plans. So looking at this overarchingly, I created this spectrum of objectives that we worked really closely with the brands, triangulating sales, looking at all the marketing challenges and brand health that we needed to overcome, to then lay out, what is it that we were solving for when we had a new campaign or a re-support? And really this was intended to help us think, because there is no silver bullet. There's no, when you're launching a new product and it only drives awareness, it can, as we know, have residual effects to driving sales. So it was really important for us to all hold hands on what our business objective was, and then how did we actually translate that into what we needed to do. And then from here, we really talked about universal language and the roles of all our marketing functions, and what could be done in influencers, how did they contribute back to these brands. And that's looking at media, it's looking at influencers, organic and paid, it's looking at your FSIs. All of these marketing functions contribute positively in some way to each of these objectives. And so it was really important for us to think not just the short term, but the long-term achievements that we needed to make, and then lay down, what was the role of influencers for us in 2019, 2020, and 2021, and be able to see this with management. From here, you're probably looking, okay, like how do you actually prove all of these metrics out, or how do you even know what to lay it out? And so what we did take is in the next step where we got really granular, And in the absence sometimes of not having, I know there's probably a range of small and big brands, you don't necessarily have all the dollars to put into a brand health or cross media tracking. So what we did first of all, to level set on expectations, which I think is super important when you're trying to map this measurement plan and prove to your management that what you're doing is good for the business and and you're showing progress, is go back to metrics. What are the proxy metrics that for each of these objectives that you would report on if you were going to be creating something or executing something against it? And this really helped everyone conceptualize, like, hey, these vehicles are contributing to something, and this is what it looks like from a basic media metric standpoint. And then what else could we potentially look at from a reporting side of things that we could triangulate with these metrics? Because you get to a point that you can measure everything and anything, but does it have any real meaning if you're just measuring for the sake of measuring? And we'll talk a little bit later about equivalency, but being able to bring everything back to common metrics across everything that we did in marketing to the main goals in our marketing objectives really started to help paint that measurement framework and build the fundamentals that we were trying to showcase as we went into influencer marketing. So you might be looking at this and going, it's very basic, but really, like, take a step back and look at what the campaigns that you're doing from short and long term across the whole year. And then how do these KPIs potentially ladder back to them is going to be a really important first step as you think about proving how influencer marketing is progressing for you within your companies.
Well, we said no nonsense and we meant it. A lot of times you have to start with the basics and get the basics right. I think what you mentioned too about making sure that the teams were aligned, making sure that across the organization and across the Revlon brand portfolio, you were all speaking the same language. You were all defining you were defining objectives in the same way, and you were defining the metrics that you were going to use in the same way and measuring them in the same way, which enabled that the ability to show the progress over time and really be able to compare apples to apples.
Yep. And when I think of effectiveness, like, it's not just the short term, it's like effective campaigns take time. And so to get people to sit still and be like, these are the things we can measure short term, but we're going to have to wait, a few weeks, 6 weeks, quarters to understand, how we're progressing with these different types of metrics to show, the value of what we're doing.
Awesome. So in terms of the second sort of major bucket of influencer marketing metrics, there is spend efficiency. And I always like to say that influencer marketing ROI starts with influencer selection. If you choose the wrong partners from the beginning, you're not going to get anywhere. And so a lot of spend efficiency really comes down to finding the right mix of people. And you guys have gotten incredibly sophisticated with this. And so I'm really eager to have you explain a little bit about how Revlon's adapted its approach to influencer selection through the lens of measurement.
So with finding the right mix of people, it was very much similar, very methodical. If you're thinking about effective marketing and planning and peeling that onion, it was starting with what are we trying to solve for? What are the objectives? What are the KPIs? And then it was like thinking about who are the people that we need to actually help us achieve this in influencer marketing specifically. And so how we did this, if you look at the next slide, Evie, you can see that, similarly, the way we mapped out our campaigns to objectives, we looked at the mix of people to objectives and what the different types of influencers can do and what were they most positively able to impact. And again, this was really meant to be something that helps you think, because we know that sometimes there is a silver bullet. You get one amazing influencer and they can absolutely drive sales, and it might be the conditions are right and the timing. But overarchingly, when we're looking at the different definitions of influencers, it was really understanding what mix did we need to help drive awareness, consideration, purchase intent, and sales. So we were thinking not just one person, because you can't think of just one creator being able to do everything for you. It was really about kind of peeling back and understanding what mix of people did we need. And then from there, you couldn't just stop it going, okay, let's just go get 20% of these people, 30% of these, and 10% of these people, and yay, we've hit it. We really, really took the time to take a step back and understand, okay, of the mix of people, who are the right people within these tiers that actually speak to our audience? And it wasn't about people that we liked or just because we know that this person has some clout. We really laid out, a checklist for us when we were going to identify the right people for our brand. It was essentially, I love the name of this, like the hygiene checklist. It was foremost understanding, who we think is for us, or who we think our audience is, to actually qualify that with data. So understand the profile of the person that we're reaching. Who are they reaching? Like how many of like those people are they reaching? What are those interests that those people within that person's audience have? Because you want to make sure that you're covering as many people in your audience. And sometimes, there is that I feel, and there is some clout that can kind of, impair our judgment. But by having, tracker in place, we were able to have really clear guidelines on what to look for when you're looking for a person to reach a certain, brand's demographic. Then twofold to this, we cannot undervalue the looking into the engagement of the content and the creativity, because in any campaign you can have the best targeting, you can pick the best person for the job, but if the creative is not there, or it's lacking in creativity and also engagement, because you're able to see that it's not necessarily doing as well compared to other things, then you're really going to put yourself in a spot where you've paid all this money for this person, and it's not actually resonating with the audience that you're trying to target, or even theirs for that matter. So it was really, really important to make sure we had that profile right, that the content was of quality, and they were creative and they were interesting, and that we were thinking about like our demographic as a person, what was their interests, what else do they like, and we weren't just trying to put a product shot into the creative. We have some really good examples of how this really came to practice for us. So we had a fragrance ambassador that we were going to re-sign for the second year. And before we had everything aggregated into one system and people were using this on an ongoing basis, we had to rely on the PR teams and, do our own little sense checks of making sure that the engagement was right, who they posted about, what they posted about, and then obviously, trust in our agencies to help us give us the right information. But what we actually found with this particular ambassador is once we put them into tracker, we found that we were able to scrutinize their audience a little bit more and see that their following wasn't in America. It was mostly in the Philippines, that they were targeting mostly females, but we wanted males, or that was who was engaging with them, and that their content was fraudulent because it just kept spiking up and down in such bizarre ways that we were able to look at industry norms on how engagement of quality tracks to realize that this was actually a bit of funny business. So we were able to go back with this information and this data, and the teams are more informed to actually say no to this partnership in a really thoughtful way. We weren't just being knee jerk. We actually were able to provide the evidence, and that saved us that paid for our tool instantly almost by able to do that and then find an alternative person to replace that ambassador that would reach our audience. And that actually, saw wonders for the campaign that we did with this new person. So I think when you're thinking about this audience checklist, it's definitely worth the extra few minutes to really understand who they're reaching for you.
Absolutely. And I think perhaps, sometimes it's cut and dry like that. It's like, okay, this is not a good partnership, or this is a good partnership, but there's a lot of nuance in this as well. Yeah. And I think that sort of leads us perhaps to sort of the next point, which was in establishing benchmarks for your spend efficiency metrics. And in this case, looking, for example, at cost per engagement, and using that as a filter from which to evaluate partnerships in the past and moving forward. And I think what's key here is the point that it's a spectrum. It's not black or white.
This is my favorite slide, and my favorite slide that I actually would show in the business, because one thing that we were able to do, and I'm not sure if this is how this is like for many of you on this call, is we had, by getting all our information together, unifying the way in which we practiced it, captured information, and then we're able to ingest it into Tracker. For the first time last year, as we watched the first year of our full year's worth of work with Tracker come to life, we were able to finally look at what our benchmarks were against the industry. What was our performance for engagement? What was our performance against reach? And so this chart, one of the things we wanted to do when we were setting out on this journey was, what is the right cost per engagement? What should it be? How do we get to that? And so by having a year's worth of our own performance data, our costs, our spends, looking at paid and organic engagement, we were able to create this spectrum of cost per engagement. And like you can see here, there is no silver bullet, but what we were able to do is contextualize for management, the bottom threshold, what is really, really good, because if you get under 15 cents, that's killer, to what the maximum is. Because I think, when in this sphere, the nuance is that sometimes you're playing for clout. And how do you actually quantify clout? So there are going to be strategic moments where you want to justify to management that you do want to bet this influencer. This is where they're faring up against our benchmarks and our KPIs, but there's a strategic reason why you want to have them involved in your program, which could be that fame or the buzz that they're going to generate. So this really helped us contextualize a top and a bottom of what we would pay for a cost per engagement. And an example of this in action was we had one of our best campaigns ever, with Wonder Woman 84. It was a niche, a very niche kind of capsule where we launched a range that was for the Wonder Woman 84 movie. And we wanted to be really smart with who we went after. Like, sure, this could have mass appeal. It's Wonder Woman. People know who she is. But we really wanted to find people that, were fans of Wonder Woman and like that really part of that kind of comic community. And so we were able to take everything that we learned on how to make sure we were looking for the right audiences, understand their audience, and what our cost per engagement and thresholds were to find these people and pay. And that we had one of the best performing campaigns ever in TikTok and in Instagram. It far outweighed everything that we had done, and it delivered upon all its objectives beyond measure. And by having these pieces in place, like KPIs and benchmarks that we could show management, we were able to really show how we progressed and why this was worth the investment, why it worked, so to say, and how we can improve on that for next time.
Absolutely. I think this also illustrates what we were trying to get at earlier too, is that these metrics play a role at different levels. So you measure a campaign in one way, but then you use that data across campaigns at the program level to start making decisions that might, for example, set benchmarks for your organization, or that can, inform future projects. So I think it's really important to see how these metrics play a role at different levels. And I'm having a little bit of a technical thing where I can't see the questions. I can only see the chat. And I noticed a bunch of questions poured in right as you started talking about this. And so I'm not sure if you can see them, Lauren, and you want to jump in.
Let me see. So how can you measure cost per engagement? I like that one. You can measure it. This is our, it's a relatively close to our cost per engagements. So how we did that is by having Tracker in place. We were able to look into so if you think of Tracker for us is our influencer CRM of record almost. And that's the best way we describe it internally. And we track every spend to every single influencer, to every KPI that's meaningful to us. So cost per engagement is one of those KPIs for our campaigns. And so in this system, we're now able to rank all our influencers, looking at the cost per engagement and the spend, and understand, where are we getting the most bang for our buck. One of our campaigns, actually, by having this data, we were able to see that, whilst we had a mix of micros, nanos, and macros, we realized that, with the cost per engagement, that we could get fewer, we would only need to employ fewer influencers, work with them a little bit long-term, and our engagement would be better than having the whole mix of them together. So I really do encourage tracking all those pieces and having a system where your costs are all there and you're tracking all your performance. And then I see cost per spectrum over country so this one is, how does the CPE spectrum vary from country to country? Funnily enough, we looked at EMEA, North America, Latin America, and it's only slight nuances. It wasn't as big as we thought it was. We were worried that, that was going to be so vastly different. Once we went through this exercise, there was definitely a few cents on either end. I'm a bit of a nerd and I like to know the information. So if you are going to undertake something like this, I wouldn't assume that everything is the same, but do the work to see what those variances are, because you will find that in different tiers, the cost per engagement was a little bit different and enough to kind of make a differentiation between the US and Europe, for example. Let's see, do I have time for another one? Let's quickly look at another one. The EMV question. Okay, how do you do this? So when I think of EMV and trying to equivalize to, and I think we're going to go into this section shortly, is you have to think about what are your benchmarks? What are you spending? How much does that cost? Because you can, of course, inflate everything by what the market value is, but you're never buying what the market value is. You're buying, based on your benchmarks, KPIs, and cost per thousands. And so we always make sure that we're looking at what, we are paying? Like, what is our $5 CPM? Like, what is our CPM for social? What does that look like? And actually report back on really honest metrics to our senior management based on what we spend.
And that was actually going to be my next question to you, which was just, I think we've covered a good, the campaign, the program side. When you're talking to your senior leadership, how do you talk about the impact of influencer marketing? How do you frame that for them? I know you've touched a little bit on how you don't rely on EMV to do that, but when you're trying to compare two different worlds and people demand a simplified view from you, what is your approach?
Like, I think with all of this, it's a lot of complex structure that you need to simplify, but also make people feel comfortable, because everyone can look at media metrics. Everyone's super comfortable to look at a media plan and see all these things on top of each other. But when it comes to influencers, we're just like, well, what's the value? What's the value? And we're kind of looking for this one number. So to kind of, I guess, rebut that back and kind of go back to management, how we triangulated progress and showing, obviously those equivalencies is one that we foremost, like I said, is had our universal measurement and tracking to show, based on the metrics that we have under those KPIs, which we do for every other channel, that we have modeled out benchmarks for those channels, and that we're able to show, comparatively, how did they perform. Then from a cost standpoint, I think one of the examples that I have for us is that, when you're doing paid influencers, for example, you had your objectives. So everyone knew what the objectives are. Everyone knows what the metrics are, because they're equal everywhere when you think of media. An impression is an impression in social. Is it in paid influencers? Is it in a magazine? And you pay a cost for it. So we were able to then look at what did we plan to do? What was our benchmark CPM? What was our benchmark engagement rate? How much did we spend? What did actually get delivered? And then what is the delta of that? Like, what is, if we were actually to pay based on what we delivered, that really shows you what the value is. Like, what was the extra value that you got? So that made it a real numbers for our management in what we would spend and what our benchmarks are, because I could quite easily inflate the value for the market, but that's not right. It allows us to kind of equivalize everything back to each different channel. And then, of course, every channel impacts differently, has a different role in impacting that objective. And so if we have influencers as driving sales and getting asked for what its reach was, look, I'll tell you what the reach is, but I'm always going to preface that this is what our primary goal is. This is how it compares to our in-channel metric KPIs and metrics. And this is what the difference is compared to the other channels that perform similarly. So I think that is really important. And it's really can be quite difficult. I'm making it sound like it's really easy to bring in all this nuance and go, hey guys, this is enough. But it really is taking the teams through methodically how to structure this and educating people back up. And I think the one thing that really is not just about the value of influencers, you're always trying to build a business case and also show why the tools that you have are valuable too. And so we make sure that we're keeping track of all the different things that we've been able to do, because we've had a new practice in place. We're allowed to stay accountable because we have the right tool. And then we track, if we didn't have this, what would we have potentially lost? So that helps us then justify why we need a tool to help us get there. If you're going to, this example I said to our CMO, if you're going to spend $2 million on mailers and you don't want to spend 5% to make sure that people are actually opening them, posting them, and doing what they've said they would do, then what's the point? We're just kind of shooting in the dark. So it was really important to have that laid out.
Absolutely. And I am going to brag a little bit for you. I just want to highlight some of the higher level achievements you and the larger Revlon organization have seen over the last year since you've implemented this approach to measurement in influencer marketing. And you have increased your share of attention, and we'll talk about what that means in a second, by 1.3 X, 130%. You've 2X'd your engagement level and 1.8X on your reach. And this is across all Revlon brands and activations. And I think what's truly incredible about this is that you activated, this is comparing 2020 to 2019. So obviously two very different years, but also you activated roughly the same number of influencers in each of those years. And yet through through the framework that you put in place, we're able to get far more out of those partnerships.
Yeah, the team, honestly, it's been such it was hard to start with, and it was hard to get everyone to hold hands, but it has paid dividends. And I can't, like, you know, I know we can't put this on the slide, but the amount of money we've actually saved from product wastage, not sending products to people that weren't necessarily doing anything. I can't stress enough how important it is to actually track your mailers and have KPIs for them. I know they're organic, but they're important. And just making smarter decisions, because we do have the data to be able to clean up our influencer lists, able to sense check more PR lists a lot quicker, you know, and get the right people that are actually reaching our audience versus who we think they might be reaching is our audience. So it's been very exciting to see. And we're like, guys, I'm under no illusion that we have a long way to catch up at Revlon. So we're happy, we're making progress.
And that is the point, right? Like that's measure to drive improvement. You know, I think whether that's in our professional or personal lives, I don't know how many people have New Year's resolutions, but if you're not measuring your progress against them, it's, you know, highly unlikely that you'll be on track by February. And, you know, I just think no matter what you're doing, measurement is such a great, it's a required tool if you're going to improve. And that is ultimately the goal of effective measurement. We didn't touch on the share of attention metric, but just really quickly, so that everyone has an idea of what that means. It's our way of measuring at Tracker the attention your brand earns among influencers, and it combines all the different metrics into one view that you can break apart, so you can see the components individually as well. So it's a tool for decision making at all levels, but it combines visibility metrics, impact metrics, and then a notion of trust, which measures how, you know, is your brand featured alone, for example, in a post, or are you one of 100 photo tags? But that's how we got to the share of attention metric, and we can answer questions about that if there are some too. But to summarize, marketing measurement in general is complicated. Let's not pretend it's not. In influencer marketing, we can break up the core metrics or the categories of metrics. We see them at 3 different sort of levels here: campaign, spend efficiency, and cost equivalency. And the key is really to just get everybody on the same page, and having one system of record where you can measure everything and speak the same language and really empower that continuous improvement. Let's see here. I think we certainly have some time here for questions, and I am going to perhaps, Lauren, ask you if you can see them. Because
I can see them. I was going to have to sort. Okay, guys, there's lots of questions. Give me a second. I need some thinking music to find. There's lots of good ones. There's one that's like, can you share what metrics you use? So when I think about metrics to use, if we go back to the lay down of the objectives, and then what are the most common metrics that fit with under awareness, under consideration, and under purchase intent and sales, for example, that should be your starting point at understanding what would your metrics be. Like, what do you triangulate as your impressions and CPMs? You know, what is your engagement rate? Like, what is the starting point? So those are the metrics that we started with. Like, when we went back to basics, we laid that out against our objectives. And then we used to start, as we were aggregating all the information of our own performance, obviously looked at industry norms, and then we tracked our performance against these different metrics. So then we started to make our own benchmarks, which we now check in every quarter to see how we're progressing on those benchmarks, and reconfiguring as well. Like, not just because we're doing better than them, we should reconfigure them and then think about what other dynamics so we're maintaining progress over time. So hopefully that answers your question to think about what types of metrics we use, and then how can you find your metrics to use. And if you do that, you're able to naturally equivalize with other types of media that you're doing, like paid social, paid digital activity. So hopefully that helps.
There's a good question. I think it was because I was in full screen and now I can see them. I like this one. How do you attribute cost per piece of content, so cost per engagement in this case, or any other cost per metric, when influencer agreements are for a lump sum for multiple content pieces across platforms?
So this one's a little bit like controversial, not controversial, but like, I'm going to say definitely a bit more forward thinking for the industry, that the industry's not there yet, but something we're trying to start doing is that the cost per content, if you've set up contracts with your influencers. Obviously there's one part, there's fees associated, there's maybe clout or there's celebrity that you're paying. But at the end of the day, if you know the year that you want to have with them, where they're starting from an engagement standpoint, what type of reach you want to get. What we've been trying to model back is that, we want you to create content that achieves these goals. So if you don't achieve these goals, does it mean you need to make more posts? Do you need to make more engaging content? Do you need to make video? And so we don't want to be too dictative of that we need 10 pieces of 10 Instagram stories, 2 in feeds. We obviously give guidance, but at the end of the day, we give guidance on what do we want to achieve by the end of the year with you? How many of your audience do we want to reach? And how many people do we want to engage with that content, which really helps incentivize the influencer and the relationship we have with them. So that, when I think of the cost per piece of content, sure, you can map it and come up with something that you feel comfortable with based on the dollars that you've spent in the past on creative. But I really encourage the reverse engineering of what do you want them to achieve for you as goals? What type of relationship do you want to have with this influencer? And create to perform.
Okay. Yeah, a little controversy is good. Do you have any advice for somebody who is perhaps choosing an influencer that really is more about buzz and celebrity status than sales? How do you think about that?
So I think about the buzz, like you can't underestimate fame and buzz. Like that is something that can propel a brand or a person or anything associated with them forward. Like you can never doubt that. And I've had a lot of conversations about how do you quantify clout? How do you know what the right amount of extra money you're meant to pay this person because they have a social standing? And it's freaking hard. Like there's no perfect science of this is what the post's worth, therefore the delta is the clout. It doesn't really work like that. So what I'd encourage to look at, if you are looking at celebrity, it's understanding, what's their sentiment in market. Definitely if you have the tools available to understand sentiment tracking, definitely do. A little cheeky trick is also Google Trends and search behavior, understanding how, what impact do they have in society is generally correlated to how people are searching. So you can definitely do that as something that's a little bit more scrappy and also very true to what people are doing at a given time. Like look at the election, for example. So I think that's something that when you're triangulating your strategic recommendation as to why I want this person, not only are you looking at their footprint, you're looking at how do they interact with culture, are they known within society or the target that you want to be targeting, what is their sentiment, and then how much earned press are they getting? Like that is still something that you can look at, like, how many mentions are they getting, in traditional, non-traditional, what kind of engagements do they have coming up, what types of things are they doing within their careers. And if you're in actual conversations with them, they're people too. So it's really good to hear what their vision and what their brand is that they're trying to create. So you too can synergize, more rationale as to why they're the right person for you guys. It goes far beyond that.
I'm going to call you on synergize.
I said it.
That's okay. That's all good.
There's lots of components to everything. That's all you can say is like, it's freaking like, there's a lot of different things that you have to bring together to prove its value, influencer marketing and marketing in general.
Yeah. So there's a question about like, if you're just beginning with influencer marketing for a given brand, how do you go about setting benchmarks? And I think, even though Revlon is a heritage brand, you had to go about setting those benchmarks for the first time. Do you have any advice specific to that?
So firstly, find your fans. Definitely find the people that are already talking about you. I think that's the foremost, the people you want to go after. If they've already shown interest in you, treat them as fans of you. And then from a benchmarking standpoint, there are obviously companies such as Tracker or industry norms that are reported on. So at the very least, if you really feel that you're doing your own back of the envelope math by looking at the engagement rates on the actual platform, understanding their dynamics on the platform, I've definitely turned to the more broader publications of understanding what is the industry seeing. Definitely speak to, even though you might not have your own reps at different social partners, definitely speak to them. Speak to someone at Facebook and Instagram, speak to someone at TikTok, speak to someone at Snapchat, understand how they're evaluating success on their platform, even if it's paid, or, what does organic traction look like? And then directionally bring these things together to kind of have as a starting point. And I think you've got to be really comfortable that there can be a little bit of gray and you're going to iterate. But if you can bring those sources together, industry, from the actual platform and looking at the channel itself, like, and who you're actually thinking about employing. That should be enough information to say, okay, success in this first instance is going to look like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of you have to start with what you have, and then you iterate and build from that. I think you can easily, track the people who are talking about you already, see the type of engagement they're getting on their organic posts, and then just you can put a dollar value again. Like, you could say, how much would I have paid this influencer to work with them? And then you could calculate what your CPE on that would have been, for example, and then use that as a place to start. I think the key is like directionally being right, as you said, Lauren, and then learning as you go. The impact, how do you track the impact of influencers across the customer or sale journey?
I guess that's a big question. It's like, well, where are they in the journey? Like, where do you think, if I think of mapping this out and thinking of all the roles of marketing and how it's contributing to the overall objective, that's going to be your starting point, because you're going to understand, where are you using influencers? What are you trying to get them to do? So if you think it's, we're using them on Instagram, we want them to drive consideration and potentially purchase, you're going to understand, okay, what are the metrics that you would get from that? Where would you want them to go next? And that would be looking at the website. How did they impact traffic? Can you isolate these different things? It's really taking almost like a whiteboarding session and understanding all the different routes. I wish I could say there was one set study that you could do and look at how did, you execute an influencer over here and see automatically how everything was impacted. It really takes a bit of time to lay out the different levers this particular influencer could pull and then affect. Like I said, with something that is a big celebrity, for example, how does it impact the customer journey and the sales journey? Is it, well, it created demand. So you saw search volume go up. You saw more organic traffic to your site. And in turn, you had a peak in sales, just say, especially if you have a digitally enabled e-commerce site. But if you didn't have that, for example, you're triangulating, what kind of clicks to buy, looking at maybe what the pass back data could be. So I think it's having a clear understanding of your journey in general, and then where influencers play a role, and then how at that time can you see their impact on certain things like sales when you executed upon them, and what would the metrics be to indicate to you that that is impact, or that has positively impacted something within the journey.
Thank you. There is a fantastic question here, just to bring us all.
These are great
really
questions.
Challenge ourselves.
I just want 4 things for you guys.
Yeah. Do you have any general advice for influencer measurement goals around products that are needs-based versus consumer want? It's not every day you can prepare for your car window regulator to stop working. And I think this is a great question. How do you think about influencer goals?
Yeah, it's context a little bit. That brings to mind context. When you think about someone, when we push marketing out, we don't think about what situation that person might need to be to make that buying decision. And that kind of springs to mind when you think about that window. It's not going to be every day. It's like, when is that person going to be in that moment? So what would be my advice? My advice would be, in this instance, you're thinking about marketing in general is about building memory structures. So one day this person is going to go, ching, I remember that. And I saw that somewhere, and it's going to register when they're in that moment that they need that particular need. So I would think there's probably some really clever things you could do that with influencers that are over time, because you don't know when that cycle or when that journey is, that shows them in this context. What did they do when they needed that thing? And like the window broke. And so it depends really what your marketing goals are and your content strategy and all of that. But I think there's something that you could definitely activate upon and show how influencers, like, they might be drive around all the time, that they've come into this issue, and kind of having that kind of continuity and creating a need space, like show when you need that product. And eventually something does happen to us where we're like, fuck, I need that. And that's the first thing that springs to mind. So I think don't underestimate salience and being top of mind, because you don't know when that trigger is going to come. Like, even in makeup, and we want something, our foundation runs out. We're not necessarily going, oh, it's 14-day life cycle. We're going, it's empty now. So hopefully that helps kind of stimulate some ways to think about how you can penetrate someone's mind and have you come top of mind.
Yeah, I would just add to that, when I mean, there's just so many opportunities to create humorous moments in this.
Yes.
I've been personally watching a lot of American football recently, and the insurance commercials, just, I don't know why, I find them hilarious all the time. And so, they do come to mind, like they stick in your mind. So I think, platforms like TikTok, for example, really open the door to some in goofy possibilities. But then I would also go back in terms of measurement to, I think that that search traffic to your site, for example, trying to correlate that to some of the things you're doing, because it's not going to be a one-to-one thing. It's not like you're going to do a campaign push and then everyone's car window
Yeah.
regulator, I had to read it again, is going to break, which now I'm going to go Google that and find out what that is. And so, I think that's also really key, is to sort of understand the dynamics of your purchase, how that comes about, and then and look for those proxies.
And can I just build? I think humor is so underrated. Like we don't use it enough. And I think the year we've just had and going into this year, where there's still going to be some challenges, I think consumers, like, you want to be entertaining. I was saying this to the team the other day. It's like, we're going to maybe still be locked at home, but how can we use our channels and influencers to provide entertainment? Because it's an attention economy. There's probably so many skincare regimes that people can follow. So across all the industries, I think it's important to look at entertainment. And I think Fernando Mercado at Burger King, even though he's out of industry for me, like, he's not a beauty practitioner, but they have done a very, very good job at using culture, bringing in the scenario, humor, influencers, and their social handles to create a world that is appealing even to someone that doesn't really buy hamburgers from a QSR restaurant. So I recommend checking out those guys.
I think we have time for one more question, and there's a couple questions, or folks building on a question just related to costs by influencers, and how just the industry norms that get published are so wildly different that, what you get from agencies or an influencer themselves is different from what agencies. There's a lot of discrepancies. Is that something that you've experienced as well? Has having a measurement framework like this in place helped make those conversations easier?
Yes. Okay. Happens all the time, and we're the worst. Like we drive up the cost of our influencer prices. L'Oreal is going to pay 50K, and we only want to pay X. The influencer's value is already inherently blown up. So how we've overcome this, and there's sometimes you do have to make hard decisions, but having a framework in place that has allowed us to create our own cost per engagement benchmarks, our own cost metrics, gives the brands a starting point. It gives us a starting point to think about when we're looking at an influencer, how much do we actually think they're worth, based on what we're all holding hands on is a threshold that we'll be willing to pay. And then, of course, they're human. So it's like having conversations with these people as well, making sure you're learning about them, understanding them, and sharing and being transparent with, like, how do you think about the value that and what you want to pay? And like, I can't underestimate like that conversation, and having the data and the information to share is really important. I think too often, you don't want to just have this one-way conversation with them. It's a two-way, and explaining, what your process is, how you've come to this number, and working together on what does that then look like as the right amount for what you're getting both from this partnership. Because some other things are not even monetary value as well, like that you can trade with each other. So it's definitely case by case, but having measurement, a starting costing point, and like thresholds of what you're willing to pay for certain tiers of influencers helps you have those conversations, helps you identify who you should go after and where to push back. Because some you're probably like, absolutely not. Even though you really like them, they've done well for other brands, there's some moments that you're going to have to make that hard choice and be like, actually, everything that I've got here is telling me I shouldn't be doing this. So reevaluate and then move on.
Fantastic. I am committed to ending this on time, and we have like less than a minute left. I want to say that we would love to keep this conversation going, and there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. You'll get an email from Tracker after this with some links that you can choose to click on if you so desire. One is to join the Influencer Marketing Collective. It's a new Facebook group we launched the first of the year, and it's just a place for influencer marketing professionals to exchange, ask questions, share jobs, share industry news. So please consider joining us. You can sign up for Cut the Crap. Cut the Crap used to be a marketing series in New York City, and perhaps a benefit of the virtual world that we live in now is that we can all participate from wherever we may be. So there'll be a link to join their list. They have amazing guests who are always a surprise, but they're fantastic. So please do check them out. Thank you, Lauren. And also we'll send you a link ungated to our white paper on measurement, which just summarizes a lot of the more nitty gritty of the categories of metrics and how to use them and things like that as well. So thank you for joining. Thank you for spending an hour with us. I know everyone's busy. It's been a pleasure to have you, Lauren. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, guys. That's a pretty cool day.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So thank you, everybody. We'll get this recording out too. Feel free to share it as well.